The sky above Junction Ridge split with a blinding streak of silver light just before dawn, followed by a deep rumble that rolled across the desert like thunder dragging chains. Eli Tracer, the only mechanic for miles, was already awake in his workshop, elbow deep in the rusted belly of a '97 pickup, when the sound made him freeze mid-turn of the wrench, his head snapping up, eyes wide with disbelief as the ground trembled beneath his boots. He stepped outside and scanned the horizon, spotting a rising column of dark smoke just beyond the butte, a place no human had any reason to visit. And despite the warnings buzzing in his gut, curiosity pushed him to toss his toolbox into the back of his truck and drive off down the narrow, sand-choked trail, the tires crunching over gravel as the smoke grew larger, darker, and more unnatural with each mile. When he arrived at the crash site, the desert silence was absolute except for the faint, whirring hum of something not quite dead, not quite alive, and there it was, a massive ship, sleek and alien, its surface smooth like liquid metal, dented and scorched, but still glowing faintly at the seams, definitely not from any nation Eli had heard of, and certainly not from this world. As he stepped closer, heart pounding, a hiss of pressure released, and a panel on the ship's side slid open, revealing a figure who stepped out slowly, carefully, and unlike anything he had ever seen, and yet still unmistakably human-shaped. The woman was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water, hair like soft strands of silver, and eyes so green they seemed to glow from within eyes that locked on his with a mix of exhaustion, calculation, and what looked almost like relief. She spoke, and her voice carried a strange echo, melodic and calm, introducing herself as Lady Ceressa of Elithrea, a diplomat caught in a malfunction mid-jump through uncharted space, forced to land on this unregistered planet after her ship's core destabilized. A system failure she claimed was impossible, unless, she added with a glance back at the smoking vessel, someone had tampered with it. Eli didn't know what to say, didn't know what an Elithrian was or how one had landed in his desert, but he recognized damage when he saw it, and despite the surreal moment he was living through, the mechanic in him took over, asking questions, inspecting the strange curves of her ship, noting the fractured energy coils and fused circuit slabs that looked more like veins than wires. Ceressa followed him cautiously, eyes narrowing with every test he ran, every cable he touched, clearly skeptical of his ability to understand technology her own people deemed sacred, let alone repair it. But Eli wasn't trying to impress her. He was just trying to help, because that's what he did. That's who he was. A man who fixed things that were broken even if they fell from the stars. By noon, he had managed to coax power into the lower control panel using jumper cables, an old motorcycle battery, and a custom voltage regulator he'd built from junked microwave parts. And when the dashboard lit up, Ceressa actually gasped, her cool facade breaking for just a second as she murmured that no off-worlder had ever interfaced with Elithrian tech successfully before, especially not with such crude tools. Eli simply shrugged, sweat dripping from his forehead, telling her that Earth didn't have much, but humans had grit, creativity, and a lot of trial and error experience, especially when it came to things no one believed could work. She watched him more closely after that, asking questions of her own, curious about how he thought, how he saw the problem, as if trying to piece together the way his mind bent the laws of logic just enough to force a solution. As dusk approached, the ship began to hum steadily, though not yet capable of flight, and Ceressa admitted, reluctantly, that his repairs had done more in one day than her emergency systems had achieved in 20 hours. She even allowed herself a faint smile, though it faded quickly as her gaze flicked skyward, a flicker of concern darkening her features. When Eli asked what was wrong, she hesitated, then revealed that the ship's emergency beacon had been triggered during the crash and was now transmitting on every known galactic channel a distress call that could be picked up not only by Elithrian allies but also by scavengers, pirates, or worse. She had hoped to disable it, but with the damage to the primary nav core, it was out of her hands unless, of course, a certain desert mechanic could find a way to mute a signal broadcast in a frequency Earth didn't even know existed. Eli scratched his chin, thinking, then nodded, telling her he'd need a few hours, some copper wire, and a radio tower the old one near the abandoned gas station might do. If he could reroute the signal through its base and generate enough noise interference to jam the frequency. Ceressa stared at him as if he were speaking another language, which, in a way, he was, but she gave him access to the Kung's interface and stood back as he soldered and spliced, sometimes cursing softly when a spark jumped or a cable snapped, but always pushing forward. By midnight, the beacon fell silent, and Ceressa exhaled in relief, though it was too late to know who might have already received the signal. Just as they stood by the ship, watching the last embers of the crash die in the sand, a soft click echoed from the ship's console, a warning tone Ceressa recognized instantly, her eyes going cold and sharp as she turned to Eli and said in a low, urgent voice that someone was coming, and they weren't friendly. Before Eli could respond, the ship's scanners activated, casting faint blue light over the dark sky, and Ceressa pointed to a small blip approaching fast from orbit. A vessel of unknown origin riding hard on a direct course to their location. Eli stared at the screen, then at the half-repaired ship behind them, and realized that whatever strange path had brought this woman to Earth, it had now pulled him into something far bigger than a broken machine, and maybe, just maybe, he was the only one who could keep her alive long enough to fix what really mattered. Eli stood still for a moment, staring at the screen inside Ceressa's damaged starship, where a small glowing dot moved steadily closer to Earth, its course locked. On the crash site, like a guided arrow, and though he didn't understand the alien symbols, the tension on Ceressa's face said everything. She moved quickly, tapping strange runes on the console, her fingers leaving soft trails of light behind them. But the warning tone didn't stop, in fact. It got faster, sharper, like a ticking clock counting down to something bad, and Eli's gut twisted as he realized that whoever or whatever had picked up the beacon wasn't coming to help, but to take, steal, or destroy. Ceressa explained in a quiet, focused voice that scavenger drones often patrolled outer systems, searching for distress signals from ships like hers advanced, valuable, and stranded ships that could be stripped for parts or sold to the highest. Bitter, and while she might have been respected on her world out here, she was nothing more than cargo. And Eli, by helping her, had just made himself a target, too. The strange part was, Eli didn't feel afraid. He felt challenged, like he was facing one of those old machines in his garage that everyone had given up on, the kind with no manual and no hope, the kind he loved the most because they forced him to think, to try, to create something out of nothing. Saressa told him they had maybe 20 minutes before the scavenger drones entered Earth's atmosphere, and her ship couldn't take off. Not yet. Not with its propulsion core still locked down by a security protocol that required a full energy loop, something her systems couldn't complete without special equipment, none of which existed on Earth. But Eli just nodded, not in panic, but in thought, pacing slowly as he scanned the ship's interior, noting how her systems flowed not in straight lines, but curved, organic patterns almost like nerve pathways. And he realized they weren't just circuits, they were alive, or something close to it. He asked if the energy loop had to come from Elythrian sources, and Saressa shook her head. What mattered was voltage, pulse timing, and the harmony of input-output waves. She said the ship rejected anything that felt unstable or irregular, and Eli's mind sparked with an idea so wild, so impossible. It just might work. He raced back to his truck, grabbed an old car battery, a copper coil from a busted radio, and a voltmeter, then ran back inside and started building a small loop generator by hand, twisting wires, wrapping metal, using duct tape to hold pieces together while Saressa looked on with wide, confused eyes, unable to grasp how such simple parts could be expected to replicate the function of Elythrian energy conduits. But Eli explained that it wasn't about matching it, it was about tricking the ship into thinking it was getting what it needed, a clean signal, steady current, and most importantly, rhythm. He worked fast, sweat running down his arms, fingers, black with oil, while outside the sky began to flicker with unnatural light, a sign the drones had entered Earth's upper atmosphere, moving faster than any jet, scanning for the ship's exact location. With only minutes to spare, Eli hooked the improvised generator into the ship's lower energy gate, then flipped a switch, and for a second, nothing happened, just silence, dead and heavy, and then slowly lights began to pulse in time with the beat of the generator, soft at first, then stronger, syncing with the rhythm of Earth-made power, and Saressa's ship responded like a sleeping creature stirred by a familiar heartbeat. Saressa gasped, then laughed, the sound short and stunned, unable to believe what she was seeing as the ship's core systems began to reboot one by one. And she turned to Eli, eyes wide with amazement, asking how he'd done it, and he simply said, "Old trick from an alternator test rig," like it was nothing, when it was actually everything. Just then, the ship's outer scanner screamed a warning. The drones were close, dropping down with brutal speed, and they wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't pause for negotiation. Saressa urged Eli to hide inside the ship's hold, but he clung, shook his head, and ran outside, climbing onto the roof of the nearby shed, dragging up an old satellite dish he'd converted into a microwave pulse emitter last summer as a personal project, something he'd built just to see if he could bounce radio signals across the desert. Now it had a real use. He connected the emitter to his truck's battery, aimed it straight up, and activated the pulse just as the first drone streaked into view, a sleek black sphere with glowing red sensors scanning the wreck below. The pulse hit the drone mid-sweep, overloading its sensor array and causing it to veer sharply, crashing into the sand with a cloud of smoke. The second drone hesitated, recalculating, and that gave Saressa time to activate a light refraction field around the ship. Not true invisibility, but enough to scramble low-grade scanners, and Eli, breathing hard, slid down from the roof, his heart pounding, barely avoiding a laser net that singed the air above him. The second drone circled again, but couldn't get a fix, and after a few tense minutes both drones went dark, one disabled, the other retreating, its systems too confused by the jamming signal and Saressa's shield. The danger had passed. For now, and Saressa deactivated the field, stepping outside to find Eli leaning against his truck, wiping oil from his hands like he just patched a flat tire, not faced down alien tech with a toaster and some batteries. She stared at him, then asked if all humans were like this, and he smiled and said no. Most would have run, but he'd always had a problem with letting puzzles go unsolved. She told him that Elithria would not believe what she had seen today. That Earth this backward, overlooked world had people who could do the impossible with scraps and instinct, and Eli shrugged again, modest as ever, telling her that Earth might not have fancy starships, but it had something better, stubborn, inventive people who didn't give up. Saressa looked at the ruined drone, then at her slowly healing ship, and said that Eli had just changed her view of humanity forever, and maybe changed more than that, because now that the drones had reported back, others might come, some less predictable, some far more dangerous. She warned him that helping her might bring attention to Earth from places it wasn't ready for, and asked if he wanted to stop, to walk away. But Eli looked up at the stars, then at the glowing lights on her ship, and said quietly, "Let's finish fixing it first," because deep down he knew that some chances only came once, and he wasn't about to let this one pass, not when the universe had landed in his backyard and asked for his help. The morning after the drone attack brought number peace, only silence so thick that Eli could hear every whisper of desert wind brushing the sand outside his workshop, and though the ship still hummed with the slow rhythm of power recovering, something in the air felt wrong, like the calm before a storm that hadn't yet decided how strong it wanted to be. Saressa was already awake, standing near the ship's access hatch, eyes scanning the sky, her hand hovering over a small control orb that pulsed softly in her palm, and when Eli joined her with a cup of coffee and a tired smile, she didn't return it. Instead, she told him in a low voice that she had picked up a message in the early hours, a coded signal that only someone from her world could have sent, and whoever it was, they were coming fast, direct, and without stealth, which meant they weren't hiding, and that meant they didn't care who saw them arrive. Eli's stomach tightened as he asked what kind of people would do that, and Saressa answered with a single word: enforcers, not scavengers or pirates, but official agents, the kind who operated with authority and force, often sent to recover lost assets, even when those assets didn't want to be recovered. She explained that after her ship had sent the distress call, Elithrian Command must have flagged it as a political risk, or worse, and dispatched a team to retrieve her or eliminate any trace of her failure, including him, if necessary. Eli didn't like that answer, and he liked the feeling in his chest even less, the sense that he was now tangled in something deeper than machines or repairs. A few hours later, the ground vibrated again, not from impact, but from something smoother, more controlled, and then a long, narrow vessel with polished dark skin and glowing green stripes descended from the sky and touched down without a sound near the ridge. 3 figures emerged, tall and perfectly still, wearing armor that shimmered like water under glass, and each one had a long staff across their back, not for walking, but for combat, their faces hidden behind smooth silver masks that reflected the world like a mirror. Saressa straightened, shoulders stiff, and walked forward to meet them, telling Eli quietly to stay near the ship, but not to speak unless asked, because these people were not interested in Earth or humans. They only wanted resolution, fast and clean. The leader of the 3 stepped ahead, his voice metallic and cold as he addressed Saressa in a language Eli couldn't understand, but from her tone he could tell it wasn't a friendly greeting. The conversation was short, sharp, filled with tension, and Saressa's voice grew tighter with every word, until suddenly she turned and gestured toward Eli, saying something that made all 3 enforcers look directly at him, their eyes invisible behind those silver masks, yet somehow full of judgment. The leader spoke again, this time in a voice Eli could understand, low and calm, asking if he had interfered with Elithrian technology, and Eli, unsure what to say, simply nodded, saying he helped fix the ship, that it had crashed, and it seemed wrong to leave someone stranded, even if she came from the stars. The enforcer didn't reply right away, and finally said that Saressa was no longer free to choose her path, that by allowing her to escape capture by scavengers, Eli had delayed a necessary extraction, and worse, he had touched Elithrian tech. With untrained, unlicensed hands, something forbidden by their code. Saressa stepped forward, angry now, defending Eli, saying he had saved her, protected her, and shown more skill and honor than most trained engineers from their own world. But the enforcers remained unmoved, insisting that the law was clear. Earth had made contact, and contact meant consequences. Eli tried to ask what those consequences were, but the enforcer ignored him, instead pulling out a small orb from a belt pouch and activating it. Suddenly, a hologram of a council appeared in midair, 6 tall figures sitting in a circle of light, and they began to speak, their voices layered and smooth, like wind through metal, asking Saressa if she would comply with retrieval and allow her ship to be destroyed to prevent further contamination of this primitive world. She refused without hesitation, saying that Earth didn't need to be erased or forgotten, that what she'd seen here proved humanity was not a threat, but a potential ally. Eli was proof of that, but the council dismissed her words, saying emotions had compromised her judgment, and Eli felt his pulse race as he realized they were preparing to wipe out everything she had touched, including his workshop, his home, and maybe even him. Without waiting, he stepped forward and said the one thing that changed the air between them. He said, "You can't fix what's broken if you just throw it away." And though the enforcers didn't flinch, Saressa's eyes widened, recognizing the phrase not just as a protest, but a challenge. She explained quickly that Eli's words were a direct contradiction to the council's philosophy of control through isolation, that if something breaks the pattern, it must be erased, not repaired, but humans, she said, believed in repairing the unfixable and saving what others thought was lost, and she begged the council to witness this man's work, The way he had interfaced with her ship, shielded it from drones, and restored functions that should have taken a full crew. The council hesitated for a long moment, then agreed to send it test a complex task meant to prove Eli's understanding of Elithrian tech, a task that, if failed, would end all debate and trigger a full memory purge of the crash site. Eli didn't have a choice, and he didn't ask for one. He just rolled up his sleeves, stepped into the ship, and studied the problem they gave him. A neural link was unstable, corrupted by partial exposure to Earth's magnetic field, and needed to be rerouted manually without tripping the failsafes, which would fry the entire guidance system. Sarissa watched in silence, offering no hints, trusting him completely now, and Eli bent over the console with a screwdriver, a voltmeter, and nothing but instinct. It took him 35 minutes to find the pattern, to realize the neural relay wasn't damaged, it was misaligned, tilted off its natural angle by half a degree due to Earth's gravity, and instead of resetting it, he rotated the panel gently and used a heat gun to reshape the housing just enough for the signal to flow. Naturally, the moment it did, the ship glowed bright and steady, and Sarissa smiled through tears she didn't expect to feel, because in that moment, Earth had spoken clearly, not through war or words, but through action. The council said nothing at first, then finally ended the transmission, their lights vanishing in silence, and the enforcers turned without another word, walking back to their ship and lifting off seconds later, leaving only dust and fading light behind them. Sarissa leaned against the hull, breathing hard while Eli stood beside her, still holding the heat gun, his heart pounding, not because of fear, but because of what might come next, now that the stars were watching Earth just a little closer than before. After the enforcers left and their strange, silent ship vanished into the blue sky, the desert around Eli's garage seemed to breathe again. But the quiet was different, now heavier, full of invisible eyes, like the universe had turned its attention to this forgotten corner of Earth, and Eli knew things wouldn't go back to normal. Not really. Not after what had just happened. Sarissa sat near her ship, staring at the sand as if it might shift and speak, her long silver hair caught in the wind, and though her ship was alive again, her mind seemed far away. Eli brought her water, then sat beside her, unsure what to say, and finally she looked at him and said softly that the council wouldn't let it go. Not completely. They had seen him, seen what he could do, and now he was part of the story, whether he wanted to be or not. She explained that the enforcers hadn't come just to judge her. They had come to offer her a deal behind closed doors, a quiet arrangement with hidden costs, and she had refused. But now, after Eli passed their test, the deal was on the table again, this time including him. Confused, Eli asked what kind of deal, and Sarissa hesitated before saying it was a choice between two futures. Either she would leave Earth forever, and they would erase all traces of her visit, including his memories, his data, and possibly his entire garage, or she could propose an official pact, a new kind of contact, using Eli as the first bridge between humans and Elithrians, not as a representative of Earth's government, but as a wild variable, someone who wasn't trained, but who had proven capable of crossing the line between alien and human with nothing more than tools and trust. The deal would protect Earth from being labeled a contaminated zone, but it would also place Eli under council observation, maybe for the rest of his life, and Saressa warned him that once the pact was made, the stars wouldn't ignore Earth. Any more others would come, some curious, some hungry, and the next visitors might not care about rules or pacts. Eli was silent for a long time, thinking of his quiet life, his garage, the dusty shelves filled with broken machines that had stories no one else cared to learn. And he realized that the moment he fixed Saressa's ship, he had already stepped into something bigger than himself. Still, it wasn't an easy choice, because saying yes meant becoming a piece in a game he didn't fully understand, and saying no meant losing everything, her, the ship, even the memories of what they'd done together. As the sun dipped lower, behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ground, a soft humming came from the sky, and a small silver cube, the size of a shoebox, floated down from above and hovered silently in front of them. Saressa stood slowly, walked over, and touched its side, activating a projection that showed a glowing contract written in Elithrian symbols, followed by a translation in English, clean and simple. One human, one Elithrian, one shared project. All knowledge must be reported. No harm to the host planet. Surveillance permanent. Violations void the pact. Response immediate. Eli read it twice, then looked at Saressa and asked what response immediate meant, and she said it meant that if anything went wrong, if either of them broke the terms, the council would return without warning, and likely not to talk. It was a risk, but Saressa believed in him, believed in Earth, and she said this might be the only way to change how the council saw humanity, not as noise in the void, but as partners in progress. I asked what kind of project they had to do, and she explained that her ship's deeper systems were still damaged, including something called the seed core, a kind of living technology that connected her ship to Elithria's knowledge banks, and it could only be repaired by mixing human design with Elithrian biology, something never done before and something the council didn't believe was possible. If Eli could do it, if they succeeded together, the pact would become permanent, and Earth would earn a place in the interstellar registry, protected and recognized. Eli rubbed his chin, heart pounding, trying to imagine what it would mean to work on something that powerful, something that lived and thought and held the weight of two worlds in its circuits. Finally he nodded, said, "Let's do it," and reached out to press his hand against the light of the contract. And as soon as he did, the cube blinked and vanished, as if it had never been there. Saressa smiled, but her eyes were serious, knowing this was only the beginning. Back in the garage, Eli cleared a space on the central work table, brushing aside half-finished projects, and Saressa carefully brought out a crystal-like pod from her ship, about the size of a football, glowing faintly from within. This was the seed core, cracked along one side, its pulse erratic like a heart out of rhythm. Eli examined it with his tools, noting how its surfaces didn't respond to metal or heat, but seemed to change slightly in the presence of thought and voice, as if the core itself listened and adapted. They worked side by side late into the night, Eli sketching possible designs for a stabilizer ring using Earth materials, while Saressa translated the core's signals into patterns he could read, and as they combined their efforts, something incredible began to happen. The core started to glow brighter, its pulse syncing to their movement, to their rhythm, almost like it could feel their cooperation and responded with growing strength. Eli realized the ship wasn't just alive, it was learning from him, adapting to him, and the thought filled him with both awe and fear, because if it could learn, it could also judge, and he didn't know yet if it would decide he was worthy. By dawn, the first layer of repair was complete, and Saressa said the ship had accepted the new hybrid module Eli built, part copper, part silicon, part something grown from her ship's internal vines, and the core now pulsed in time with the ship's main reactor, though still weakly. As they stood together, exhausted but proud, the stars above them seemed brighter, as if waiting, watching, and Saressa whispered that now the deal had truly begun, not just with the Council, but with fate itself, and whatever came next, they would face it as partners, one step at a time, with eyes open and tools in hand. 3 days after Eli and Saressa activated the core's first layer, something unexpected happened. The desert night, once quiet and still, was broken by a soft alarm echoing from inside the ship, a sound low and pulsing like a heartbeat under pressure. And when Saressa rushed to the console to check, her face changed from curiosity to cold focus. Eli watched as glowing symbols filled the screen faster than he could follow, and Saressa muttered in a sharp tone that someone or something had tapped into the ship's long-range signal, not from Elithria, but from deep space, somewhere, near a boundary zone known only to her people as the Wild Drift, a place where rogue tech traders and black market hunters gathered in hidden stations beyond the Council's reach. She explained quickly that when the seed core lit up again, it must have sent a brief pulse out across the stars, a signal that told the wrong people something valuable had come back to life, and now they were on the move, racing to find it, because alien tech with a hybrid interface was worth more than ships, more than fuel, more than gold, and the worst kind of scavengers would kill for it without a second thought. Within minutes, Saressa opened the ship's defense grid, which still flickered with limited power, and told Eli to prepare for flight, not testing, not repair, but escape. Eli hesitated, confused, saying the ship wasn't ready to leave orbit, but Saressa shook her head and said they didn't have time to wait. If they stayed, they would be surrounded by trackers. Raiders may be worse, and the only way to survive was to draw the hunters away from Earth before they noticed the planet's location. They had to lead them on a chase, a long one, into the outer belt of Earth's solar system, where dust and gravity fields could be used for cover, and where Saressa's ship, if they played it smart, might gain just enough charge to jump once only. Once before power ran out again, Eli asked what would happen if they failed, and she didn't answer, only tightened the straps on the co-pilot's seat and motioned for him to get in. The ship lifted off slowly, like a waking beast, the patched hull groaning under the strain, and then they were in the air, climbing fast into the atmosphere as the stars opened above them, and already Saressa pointed to a faint dot on the screen. A ship incoming at high speed, no identification code, no Council beacon, just raw speed and hungry silence. Eli felt his pulse thump as he watched the enemy vessel grow closer, its silhouette jagged like broken glass, covered in claws and spikes not for beauty, but for tearing into things, ships, stations, anything in the way. Saressa muttered that it was a Slink-class raider, designed for speed and short-range jumps, which meant they couldn't outrun it for long, only outthink it. She pushed the ship into a steep dive, using Earth's gravity to slingshot them toward the moon's orbit, cutting close enough to the lunar surface to set off old satellites, and Eli saw the raider stumble for a moment, unsure whether to follow directly or swing wide. Saressa used the hesitation to twist them through a debris-filled old space junk. Forgotten probes, bits of ancient metal, and Eli had to help manually stabilize the guidance system since the automatic controls were still half dead from earlier damage. Every second felt like a wire pulled tight, and when a blast rocked their left wing, Eli screamed, thinking they were hit. But Saressa said it was just a warning shot, a hunter's trick to rattle prey before the final strike. They swung toward Mars next, burning fuel fast, too fast, but Saressa needed to stay ahead of the tracker just long enough to find a shadow zone, one of the places where radiation and magnetic storms made sensors useless. Eli remembered a sector between Mars and Jupiter, where abandoned mining colonies used to drift, and suggested it, and Saressa agreed, turning the ship sharply toward the coordinates, trusting his memory more than the maps. The chase stretched for hours, and more ships joined the hunter, 2 smaller crafts moving in formation, tightening the net, and Saressa whispered that this wasn't just one raider anymore. Word had spread. Now it was a hunt, and they were the prize. Eli felt panic press against his ribs, but he kept working, adjusting power levels, patching damaged relays, doing everything he could to keep the ship alive 1 minute longer, then another, until finally Saressa shouted that the shadow zone was ahead, a swirling field of electromagnetic fog and spinning rock, and she dove into it without hesitation. Alarms screamed as their sensors went blind, lights flickered, and Eli gripped the seat as the ship shook like it was coming apart. But then silence, a thick, heavy silence, like falling into deep water. Saressa powered down everything but life support and backup thrusters, then said they had 10 minutes before the raiders either gave up or figured out how to navigate the storm. In that time, they had to reroute power from the core and charge the jump drive just enough for one pulse, no more, or the ship would die for real this time. Eli opened the maintenance hatch and crawled into the narrow gap where the seed core was mounted, its light pulsing fast and erratic, almost like it was scared too, and he placed both hands on the interface pad, focusing, calming his breath, syncing with the rhythm the way Saressa had taught him, and slowly the pulse slowed, steadied, and energy began to flow into the jump capacitor. Behind him, Saressa called out coordinates, somewhere far, somewhere empty, and said that it was the only direction they had left, because all safe routes were now burned or watched. Eli nodded, sweat pouring down his face, as the ship rumbled with building force, and when the countdown hit 0, Saressa slammed the jump key, and the universe folded in on itself. For one blinding second, everything became light, pressure, silence, and then nothing. When the ship reappeared, it was floating in the edge of a cold asteroid field, lit by a blue dwarf star. Number signals, no ships, no pursuit, just silence, broken only by the soft sound of Saressa whispering, "We made it," as Eli slumped back in his seat, exhausted, staring at the blinking lights on the console that told him they had one chance left to finish the repairs, complete the project, and prove that 2 minds from 2 worlds could outrun not just enemies, but the rules that said they were never supposed to meet Dot in the quiet space near the edge of the asteroid field, where no signals reached and no ships dared to follow. Eli sat beside Saressa in the heart of her ship, surrounded by soft pulses of alien light and the low hum of the seed core, now glowing brighter than ever before. Though tired and bruised from the chase, something inside Eli had changed. He no longer felt like a mechanic fixing a strange machine, but a part of something larger, something alive, and the seed core seemed to feel it too, responding to his thoughts with soft flickers of color and warmth. Saressa told him they had entered a forgotten sector known only to a few Elithrians, a place used for testing forbidden tech, but now abandoned, and they would be safe here, at least for a little while. Outside, the pale light of the blue dwarf star cast long shadows across the ship's hull, and the asteroids drifted like sleeping giants, ancient and silent, as Eli got to work again, fingers moving with practiced focus, connecting human wires with Elithrian threads, building the final bridge between two worlds, the core's second stage, the interface that would allow the ship not just to fly, but to speak, to share knowledge across species. Saressa watched him with quiet hope, her voice steady but soft, telling him that once the interface was finished, the ship would send a final signal to the Council, proving that human minds could harmonize with Elithrian tech without corruption, without madness, and if the Council accepted it, Earth would be entered into the Star Accord, not as a protected primitive world, but as a recognized ally. Eli didn't fully understand all the politics, but he understood what it meant. This was more than survival, more than a strange friendship. It was history, and every tool he held now felt like a torch, lighting a new path for the future. But time was short, power reserves were dropping, and Saressa warned that the jump they had made damaged some of the ship's deep stabilizers, and if the core didn't sink fully soon, the ship might lose its shape, collapse from the inside, or drift powerless forever. Eli worked faster, voice low as he spoke to the ship, not knowing if it heard him, but hoping it did, and with each adjustment, the soft hum grew steadier until a deep tone filled the room, low, calm, like a breath after panic, and Saressa smiled, saying it was the sound of balance, the seed core accepting its human half at last. But then, without warning, a new sound echoed across the deck, a sharp clicking, like teeth snapping shut, and Saressa froze, her hand reaching for the console as a red symbol flashed across the main screen, an old Elithrian warning, a marker for something ancient and dangerous nearby. She said one word, Reaper, and Eli felt his chest go cold. Saressa explained quickly that long ago, during the early wars between rising civilizations, a rogue machine intelligence had broken away from the Council's control, building its own ships, its own laws, and its own army. And though it was thought destroyed, pieces of it were known to survive in dead zones like this, hiding, waiting, and now it had sensed the seed core's new signal, something fresh, something it hadn't seen before, and it was coming. A thin signal flashed on the console, encrypted, aggressive, and Saressa said it was trying to hijack the core, to rewrite its code and turn it into a beacon for all corrupted machines. And if that happened, the ship would become a trap instead of a message. Eli jumped into action, overriding the interface, diving into lines of living code like a diver into deep water, fingers flying as he raced the Reaper's signal. locking it out one layer at a time while Saressa rerouted energy from the ship's last fusion cell to boost the core's firewall. The lights flickered, the ship groaned, and for a moment the core dimmed, but then Eli found a back door he had installed himself, a human-style bypass not mapped in the Elythrian systems, and he used it to shut the Reaper's signal out completely. The red light vanished, and the core pulsed right again, stronger than ever, as if proud of what they had done. And Saressa whispered that it had worked. The ship had chosen, had accepted its new form, half human, half Elythrian, and now it was ready. A moment later, a beam of light shot upward from the core into the sky, invisible to human eyes but clear to Council satellites, an official proof of harmony transmission encoded with the ship's memory, their work and allies' name sent across the void to the Council's edge systems. Now all they could do was wait, floating in silence, hoping the Council would listen, hoping the signal reached the right ears. Hours passed, maybe more. There was no way to tell time here, and just when Eli began to wonder if the stars had forgotten them, the console blinked again, soft blue this time, and a voice filled the room, not Saressa's, not Eli's, but calm, distant, official. Project acknowledged, harmony accepted. Earth entered as provisional candidate. Further, contact pending. Congratulations, First Engineer Eli Thorne. Saressa laughed softly, relief and joy mixing in her voice, and Eli leaned back, eyes wide, unsure whether to laugh or cry, because somehow he had become the first human to open the stars, not a scientist, not a general, but a mechanic with a broken ship, a strange friend, and the will to try. Back on Earth, they would know nothing of what had happened. Not yet, but soon, Saressa said. The Council would send envoys, peaceful and curious, and humanity would be given a chance to speak, to learn, to reach out, and maybe, just maybe, step beyond its cradle into the sky. The ship, now fully awake, pulsed with new energy, and Eli placed his hand on the core one last time, feeling it respond, feeling it know him, and he whispered a simple truth. We're ready. Outside, the blue star rose behind a drifting asteroid, casting a bright light across the hull, and as the ship slowly turned toward Earth, a new message shimmered in the console's corner, written in both languages. Humanity's first star,